She has sworn an oath to a constitution that could, on paper, end her claim to the throne before she ever wears the crown. She has completed training with all three branches of the Spanish armed forces. She has become the first member of the Spanish royal family in history to earn her parachute wings. And yet there are real, written into law scenarios in which Leonor, Princess of Asturias, never becomes Queen of Spain. Not because of a scandal. Not because of a secret she's hiding. Not because of some fabricated leaked message circulating on channels that specialize in inventing royal drama out of nothing. This is not that kind of video. If you've spent any time in this corner of YouTube, you've seen the thumbnails, shocking claims, invented quotes, AI-generated images of royals who never posed for them, stories sourced from nothing but a caption writer's imagination. We built this channel to do the opposite of that. Every claim you're about to hear is grounded in Spain's actual constitution, its actual political history, and its actual public opinion data. And when we get to the edges of what's verifiable, we're going to tell you exactly where the line is. So stay with us, because the real answer to, could Leonor never become queen, is more fascinating, and far more historically loaded, than any fake headline could be. Let's start with where things stand today, because context matters before we talk about what could go wrong. Leonor was born on October 31, 2005, the elder daughter of then Prince Felipe and Princess Letizia. When her grandfather, King Juan Carlos I, abdicated in June 2014, her father became King Felipe VI, and Leonor, at 8 years old, became heir presumptive to the Spanish throne. On her 18th birthday, in October 2023, she stood before a joint session of the Spanish Congress and Senate and swore an oath of allegiance to the Constitution, the formal step that confirmed her legal standing as heir. Since then, she has moved through an extraordinarily deliberate program designed to prepare her for the role: military training at the General Military Academy in Zaragoza with the Army, a naval training voyage aboard the tall ship Juan Sebastián de Elcano, and most recently, flight and officer training with the Air Force at the San Javier Academy, from which she graduated on July 10, 2026, receiving the Grand Cross among her honors. Along the way, in June 2026, she completed parachute training and became, by multiple royal household confirmations, the first member of the Spanish royal family in history to earn that qualification. This September, she's set to begin studying political science at Carlos III University in Madrid. On paper, this is about as textbook a succession as a modern constitutional monarchy can produce. So why are we even asking the question in the title? Because a constitutional monarchy, by definition, exists inside a constitution, and constitutions can change, contain conditional clauses, and be reinterpreted by the political bodies that oversee them. Being heir presumptive is not the same as being guaranteed a coronation. Let's go through the actual mechanisms, one at a time, starting with the one that gets discussed the least but is arguably the most legally concrete. Article 57 of the Spanish Constitution governs the order of succession to the crown. But it's Article 57, paragraph 4, that contains the clause most relevant to a young, unmarried heir entering adulthood. That paragraph states that any person who marries against the express prohibition of the King and the Cortes Generales, Spain's parliament, will be excluded from the line of succession, along with their descendants. This is not a hypothetical clause invented for dramatic effect, it's a real, standing part of Spanish constitutional law, carried over in essentially the same form from the 1978 Constitution's original drafting. Historically, it hasn't needed to be invoked. But its existence means that Leonor's eventual choice of spouse is not, legally speaking, purely a private matter. If a future marriage were formally opposed by both the reigning monarch and the parliament, an extraordinarily high bar, requiring institutional consensus, not just family disapproval, her exclusion from the succession would be a constitutional mechanism, not a scandal. It's worth being precise here. This clause has never been used against an heir apparent to the Spanish throne in the modern constitutional era. It is a dormant provision, not an active threat. But dormant is not the same as non-existent, and it means her path to the throne carries a formal condition that a private citizen's life choices simply don't. That's the first mechanism. Let's talk about the second, which is less about her individually and more about the institution she's set to inherit. In 2014, Juan Carlos I abdicated the throne after nearly 4 decades as king. That abdication itself is instructive, because it proves something important: succession in a constitutional monarchy is not automatic or irreversible. Juan Carlos's decision came after a period of declining public standing, driven by a combination of factors including an ill-timed elephant hunting trip during Spain's financial crisis and mounting questions about the monarchy's transparency. Then, in August 2020, Juan Carlos left Spain entirely, relocating to Abu Dhabi amid Spanish and Swiss investigations into his financial dealings, including allegations connected to a high-speed rail contract in Saudi Arabia. He wrote a letter, released publicly, explaining his departure as a decision made in the best interest of the monarchy's institutional standing. The investigations into him were later closed, in Spain's case due to the statute of limitations and, in relevant part, insufficient prosecutable evidence, and Juan Carlos has not been convicted of a crime. But the reputational damage to the institution itself was significant and lasting, and it's a documented, direct precedent for how quickly a royal succession story can be reshaped, not by a change in the law itself, but by a shift in the monarchy's public and political standing. That leads directly into the third and, in our assessment, the most structurally significant path: the monarchy's relationship with Spanish public opinion, and by extension, with the political parties that could one day hold enough power to challenge its constitutional status. Spain's monarchy is not ancient and unbroken the way some European crowns present themselves. It was restored in 1975 after decades of dictatorship, and the current constitutional settlement dates only to 1978. That means it's a monarchy that exists because of a specific, negotiated political compromise, not a millennium of unbroken tradition, which also means it's a monarchy that a future political majority could, in theory, revisit. Polling on Spanish attitudes toward the monarchy is not uniformly one direction. A 2022 survey from the polling firm Synaptica found 51.6% of respondents favored Spain becoming a republic, against 34.6% who preferred keeping the monarchy, while a separate poll conducted the year before had shown 55.3% support for the crown. That volatility matters more than either single number. It tells you that support for the monarchy in Spain is not a settled, stable supermajority, it's a live political question that moves with events, scandals, and the generational makeup of who's being asked. Research from institutions like the University of Murcia has tracked this generational divide specifically. Generally finding younger Spaniards significantly less attached to the monarchy as an institution than older generations who lived through the transition to democracy. If that generational pattern holds as those younger cohorts age into a larger share of the electorate, the political coalition capable of amending or abolishing Article 57 and the monarchy's constitutional role becomes less far-fetched with each passing decade. To be clear about what this is and isn't, there is no active, mainstream Spanish political coalition currently pursuing a constitutional amendment to abolish the monarchy, and doing so would require a reinforced constitutional reform procedure that is deliberately difficult to trigger. This is a long-horizon structural risk, not a headline waiting to happen next year. Let's pause here, because there's a pattern interrupt worth making explicit. Notice what we haven't said. We haven't told you Leonor is secretly engaged to someone the family disapproves of. We haven't told you there's a health crisis being hidden from the public. We haven't invented a rift between her and her father based on a single photograph where nobody happened to be smiling. Those are the kinds of claims that populate a huge percentage of royal content on this platform right now, a lot of it, frankly, generated by AI tools that can produce a plausible-sounding, leaked report, or a fabricated quote in about the time it takes to type a prompt. We're not going to do that to you, and if you've been burned by a channel that did, that's exactly why we built this one differently. Every claim in this video traces back to a constitutional article you can read yourself, a documented historical event, or a published polling dataset. When we don't know something, like exactly how Article 57.4 would play out if it were ever actually invoked against a sitting heir, because it never has been, we're going to say so plainly instead of filling the gap with drama. Now, let's widen the lens for a moment, because Spain is not the only European monarchy facing this exact category of question, and the comparison is useful. Constitutional monarchies across Europe generally sit on one of two foundations, either genuinely deep, multi-century public affection built through centuries of relatively stable rule, or a more recent, negotiated political settlement that trades royal ceremonial status for the crown staying entirely out of active governance. Spain's monarchy leans much closer to the second category. It was reintroduced specifically as part of the transition away from the Franco dictatorship, with Juan Carlos I positioned by Franco's government as a continuity figure, only to then preside over Spain's actual democratization, a role that earned him enormous credibility in the 1970s and 80s, credibility that his later conduct substantially eroded. That means the Spanish crown's legitimacy has always rested less on ancient bloodline mystique and more on the ongoing performance of the institution and the individuals in it. Every royal family in Europe is, to some degree, on probation with its public. But Spain's monarchy is on a shorter leash than most, precisely because its modern legitimacy was built through a specific historical bargain rather than inherited unquestioned. Which brings us back to Leonor specifically, and to what's actually different about her generation of preparation for the crown compared to her father's. Felipe VI's own path to the throne involved a fairly traditional royal education, military service, and a notably reserved, cautious public presence for decades before he became king. Leonor's preparation has been more publicly staged, more deliberately transparent, and arguably more accelerated. The decision to send her through all three branches of the armed forces, Army at Zaragoza, Navy aboard the Elcano, Air Force at San Javier, wasn't just a personal development program. It was a visible, structured demonstration of institutional seriousness, seemingly designed in part to answer the exact kind of public confidence questions we've been discussing. Royal Decree 173/2023 formally established the structure of that training program, which is itself notable. It's rare for the mechanics of an heir's preparation to be codified in a government decree rather than simply arranged privately within the royal household. That level of formalization suggests the Spanish state understands exactly what's at stake in Leonor's public reception, and is trying to build her legitimacy through visible competence and service rather than relying on birthright alone. Her graduation from San Javier in July 2026 was the final formal step in that three-year program, and it was covered with the kind of institutional weight that signals the monarchy treating it as a genuine milestone, not just a photo opportunity. The parachute qualification she completed that same year, becoming the first in her family's history to earn it, fits the same pattern. It's a credential, a demonstration, evidence deliberately generated for public consumption that she is taking the substance of the role seriously, not just the title. This September, when she begins her political science degree at Carlos III University, she'll be doing something her father didn't do in quite the same way at the same stage, pursuing an academic credential specifically aligned with the governance and constitutional literacy the role will eventually demand of her, rather than a more general course of study. All of that preparation matters directly to the question this video is asking, because it's essentially the institution's answer to the risks we've just laid out. If the monarchy's long-term survival depends partly on sustained public and political confidence, then flooding the public record with evidence of Leonor's competence, discipline, and constitutional seriousness is a direct, deliberate countermeasure to the erosion Juan Carlos caused and to the generational drift in the polling we discussed earlier. Whether it will be enough is not something any of us can answer with certainty, and we're not going to pretend otherwise. What we can tell you is that the pattern is consistent and clearly intentional. This is a family, and a state, that appears acutely aware their monarchy's future is not guaranteed by the Constitution alone, and is actively working to build the kind of public trust that no legal document can manufacture on its own. Before we get to the last piece of this, if you've made it this far, consider subscribing. We put a genuinely unusual amount of verification work into every video on this channel, checking constitutional texts, cross-referencing polling data, and specifically flagging where the documented record actually ends, because there is so much fabricated and AI-generated royal content out there right now that we think accuracy has become the actual differentiator, not just a nice-to-have. If that approach is useful to you, subscribing helps this kind of reporting keep reaching more people instead of the algorithm defaulting to the next invented, leaked bombshell. So let's bring this together and answer the question the title actually asks. Could Leonor never become Queen of Spain? Structurally, yes, there are real, non-fabricated paths. Article 57.4 gives the king and the Cortes a constitutional mechanism to exclude her from succession over a marriage they jointly and formally oppose, though it's never been invoked against an heir apparent and would require an extraordinary level of institutional conflict to trigger. Her grandfather's abdication and subsequent exile prove that succession in this monarchy is not simply automatic or irreversible once a coronation eventually happens, since Juan Carlos's own departure shows institutional standing can shift dramatically within a single reign. And underneath all of it sits the deeper structural question: Spain's monarchy exists because of a 1978 constitutional settlement, not because of an unbroken thousand-year bloodline. And settlements made by one generation of politicians can, at least in theory, be revisited by a future one, particularly if the generational erosion in public support that researchers have already started documenting continues over the coming decades. None of that means it's likely. The far more probable outcome, based on everything currently in the documented record, is that Leonor completes her preparation, ascends the throne when her father's reign ends, and becomes Spain's first reigning queen since Isabella II left the throne in the 19th century. But probable and guaranteed are different words, and a constitutional monarchy, almost by definition, can never honestly promise the second one. That distinction, probable versus guaranteed, is really the throwline of everything Leonor has been doing publicly for the past 3 years. The military training, the parachute qualification, the political science degree she's about to begin, none of it was strictly required by law. Legally, she's already the heir. She swore that oath at 18 and the Constitution did the rest. Everything since then has been about building a case to the Spanish public and to Spain's political institutions that she deserves the trust the Constitution has already extended to her on paper. That's a genuinely unusual position for an heir to a throne to be in, actively campaigning, in the most literal sense, for the legitimacy her birth already legally guarantees her. It's also, we'd argue, a pretty clear signal of how seriously the institution takes the risks we've walked through in this video. We'll leave you with this. Next time, we're taking a closer look at what Leonor's political science coursework at Carlos III might actually mean for how she approaches the constitutional role itself, whether a monarch who's formally studied governance theory engages with that role any differently than one who inherited the position without that academic grounding, and what her professors and the university's own program have said about what she'll actually be studying. If today's video gave you the real, sourced version of a question that most of this platform only ever answers with fabricated drama, that next one will too. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you there.